Do you disagree that you've had problems bringing people into your military? And do you think that it's respectful to come to the Oval Office of the United States of America and attack the administration that is trying to prevent the destruction of your country?
A lot of questions. Let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
First of all, during the war, everybody has problems. Even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless. God bless. You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that.
That's
Remember
exactly what
this.
you're doing.
You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel. We're going to feel very good.
You will feel influence.
We're going to feel very good and very strong.
You will feel influence.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. But right now, you don't. You're playing cards. You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country. That's back to you, far more than a lot of people said they should have.
Have you said thank you once this entire meeting? No, in this entire meeting, have you said thank you? You went to Pennsylvania and campaigned for the opposition in October. Offer some words of appreciation for the United States of America and the president who's trying to save your country.
Please, you think that if you will speak very loudly about the war, you can...
He's not speaking loudly. He's not speaking loudly. Your country's in big trouble.
Can I
Wait a minute. No.
Now let's have a look at what the American newspaper with the second highest number of print subscribers has to say about this interaction between American President Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance loudly berated President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine on Friday in an explosive televised shouting match unlike any seen in the Oval Office between an American president and foreign leader in modern times. Mr. Trump and Mr. Vance castigated Mr. Zelensky for not being grateful enough for US support in its war with Russia and sought to strong-arm him into making a peace deal on whatever terms the Americans dictate. With voices raised and tempers flaring, Mr. Trump threatened to abandon Ukraine altogether if Mr. Zelensky did not go along. Talking over the Ukrainian leader, Mr. Vance told Mr. Zelensky that it was disrespectful for him to come to the Oval Office and make his case in front of the American news media and demanded that he thank Mr. Trump for his leadership. Mr. Trump jumped in and told the Ukrainian leader, "You're not really in a good position right now and that you're gambling with World War III. You're either going to make a deal or we are out." Mr. Trump added, "And if we are out, you'll fight it out and I don't think it's going to be pretty." Minutes later, Mr. Trump seemed to call off the rest of the visit. "I have determined that President Zelensky is not ready for peace if America is involved because he feels our involvement gives him a big advantage in negotiations," he wrote on social media. "I don't want advantage, I want peace." He disrespected the United States of America in its cherished Oval Office. He can come back when he is ready for peace. Mr. Zelensky soon departed the White House in a black SUV. The exchange in front of television cameras was one of the most dramatic moments ever to play out in public in the Oval Office and underscored the radical break between the United States and Ukraine since Mr. Trump took office. Mr. Trump has effectively sided with Russia while falsely blaming Ukraine for starting the war and calling Mr. Zelensky a dictator. Mr. Zelensky's hurriedly arranged visit to Washington on Friday was meant to smooth over the rift and seal an agreement demanded by Mr. Trump in which Ukraine would hand over many billions of dollars worth of mineral rights to repay military aid provided by President Joseph R. Biden Jr. and Congress over the 3 years since Russia's full-fledged invasion in 2022. Mr. Trump seemed ready to make nice with Mr. Zelensky by telling reporters on Thursday that he did not remember the dictator comment and expressing respect for the Ukrainian leader. He welcomed Mr. Zelensky at the door of the West Wing on Friday morning with an honor guard, and they shook hands politely but without evident warmth. The encounter, though, quickly turned hostile shortly after they sat down in the Oval Office with journalists present. Mr. Zelensky, dressed in his usual dark, long-sleeved shirt, sought to explain the history of the war with Russia, noting that it went back to 2014 when Moscow first seized Crimea and occupied territory in eastern Ukraine. But Mr. Vance interrupted and began assailing Mr. Zelensky. I think it is disrespectful for you to come to the Oval Office to try to litigate in front of the American media, he lectured. You should be thanking the president. He accused Mr. Zelensky of mounting a propaganda tour in the United States. Do you think it is respectful to come to the Oval Office and attack the administration that is trying to prevent the destruction of your country? Mr. Zelensky tried to respond to Mr. Vance's assertions and said that the United States could feel threatened by Russia someday. You have a nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future, he said. That triggered Mr. Trump, who cut him off. Don't tell us what we are going to feel, he said, raising his voice. You are not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now, he added. You're gambling with World War III. Mr. Vance jumped back in. Have you said thank you once? Mr. Trump's blow-up with Mr. Zelensky contrasts with his assessment of Mr. Putin, whom he has only praised since winning a second term. Just this week, the president called Mr. Putin a very smart guy and a very cunning person. He said that he believed that Mr. Putin really wants peace and predicted on Thursday that he'll keep his word if a deal is reached, despite multiple Russian violations of agreements in the past. While he has spoken with Mr. Putin by telephone, Mr. Trump has given little sense of how he expects to negotiate either a ceasefire or an enduring peace agreement. During last year's campaign, he promised to end the war within 24 hours and to do so even before his inauguration, neither of which he actually did. Since taking office, Mr. Trump has demanded that Ukraine turn over some of its natural resources as payback for military aid provided under President Joseph R. Biden Jr. to defend itself against Russia. While Mr. Trump has repeatedly and falsely claimed that the United States of America has contributed $350 billion American dollars and Europe only $100 billion. In fact, according to the Kiel Institute for the World Economy, Europe has allocated $138 billion compared with $119 billion from the United States of America. Now let's have a look at what the American newspaper with the highest number of print subscribers has to say about the interaction between American President Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. President Trump said he would take one more question, and then everything fell apart. It had been a relatively polite Oval Office meeting between Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who was in Washington on a mission to secure the United States' continued support in the effort to end Russia's 3-year-old war in Ukraine. But Vice President J.D. Vance interjected. I have to respond, he said, taking issue with reporters' questions about Trump's interactions with Russian President Vladimir Putin. What makes America a good country is America engaging in diplomacy. That is what President Trump is doing, Vance said. Zelensky shot back, laying out Putin's years-long campaign to occupy Ukraine. From there, the conversation devolved into a tense and personal argument that played out on television cameras in front of millions of viewers, stunning senior officials in Washington and Kiev and threatening a US-Ukraine deal that could have laid a pathway for ending the war. The meeting ended with Trump declaring that the beleaguered nation did not want his help reaching a ceasefire, and the US president kicking Zelensky out of the White House, according to American and Ukrainian officials. It was also a rare moment of public tension in the Oval Office, which has for years been the staging ground for tightly choreographed interactions between American presidents and world leaders. I think it is disrespectful to come to the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media, a visibly angry Vance said, before continuing to chide the Ukrainian leader. Have you said thank you once? Vance asked. We are thankful, Zelensky responded. At one point, Zelensky accused Vance of shouting, saying, you think that if you will speak very loudly, but Trump interrupted, saying he's not speaking loudly, your country is in big trouble. I know, Zelensky said. You're not winning, Trump said. You're not winning this. You have a damn good chance of coming out okay because of us. The US president hunched over in his chair between Zelensky and Vance, pointed his finger at the Ukrainian leader as he spoke and at one point touched Zelensky's shoulder. The long-planned meeting was the culmination of a week of discussions with European leaders who spent days flattering the US president in hopes that he would come to Ukraine's aid. For days, Trump telegraphed that Zelensky would sign a rare minerals deal that would eventually reimburse the US for the billions that it has sent to Kiev. Instead, it ended with a cancelled press conference and Zelensky leaving the White House early. As the Oval Office standoff unfolded, Ukrainian Ambassador Oksana Markarova stopped scribbling in a blue notebook and put her head in her hands. A White House staffer whispered, "This is going to be big." After the media left the office, word circulated in the crowded White House press room that the rest of the day's scheduled events with Zelensky would be called off. Television cameras and reporters gathered outside the White House to watch Zelensky's black SUV depart. When world leaders come to the US to meet with the president, they typically sit in the Oval Office and exchange rehearsed comments about one another with the media present. Then they close the doors and hash out their differences. That is what happened this week when Trump met with French President Emmanuel Macron and UK's Prime Minister Keir Starmer. The schedule for Friday was similar until it went off the rails. The disagreements between Trump and Zelensky started to emerge as the two men took a series of questions from reporters that centered on whether Russian President Putin can be trusted. Trump said that he has a particularly close relationship with Putin and suggested that their bond grew in his first term after Russia was accused of meddling in the election on his behalf. But as Trump suggested that Putin would honor agreements, Zelensky shook his head in disagreement. Earlier in the meeting, a reporter asked Zelensky why he was not wearing a suit. Zelensky has a tradition of wearing casual, military-style clothing with world leaders as a visual reminder to the world that his country is at war. He said that when his country isn't at war, he will wear a nice suit, perhaps nicer than the blue one the reporter was wearing. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, sitting on a sofa, frowned and looked away as Vance laughed at the question. Still, Trump and Zelensky seemed to largely paper over the disagreements at first, with Zelensky initially only lightly reminding the Americans about his extensive experience dealing with Putin and the many times that the Russians have not honored agreements. Then Vance said he wanted to respond to the question that Trump had just answered on whether the president is aligned with Russia. Trump had said he was aligned with the world, wanting to find peace. Trump initially watched as the two men bickered back and forth, but he cut in when Zelensky said that the US would eventually feel the consequences of trusting Russia, suggesting that Putin will not be satisfied. "You are in no position to dictate to us what we are going to feel," Trump said, later adding, "You are gambling with World War III." After about 50 minutes, Trump said, "I think we've seen enough," signaling to his press staff to ask the media to leave. As reporters left the Oval Office, Trump quipped, "This is going to be great television."